Coming up next on the Lowe Zone. The Boston Celtics broke a franchise record 27 made three-pointers on Saturday night in their win against the New York Knicks. We dive into how they made that happen. And the Golden State Warriors, is it too early to write off the defending champs? They've lost to some pretty easy teams their last 5 games. They were riding a 5-game losing streak. And a team that's not riding a losing streak, it's the Cavaliers. They're second in the East, 7-1, and they're winning in the land again without LeBron James. All that and more coming up.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Justin Lowe. That's Seamus Zarlingo. Welcome back to the Lowe Zone, a daily morning show. I shouldn't say daily. I should say weekly morning show every Sunday morning, 10 a.m. Get your coffee. Look at this. I got mine early. I already drank mine. I got nothing but the ice left. Seamus, welcome back to the show. Some technical difficulties last week, but you're back here this week, and I'm really excited to bring you back. It was a really exciting week in the NBA, but before we dive into things, how are you? How are you doing? And give us a little update.
I'm pretty good, other than the fact the technology device in which I'm bringing you this on my video feed on has not worked worth of shit in the past week. I don't know if we can cuss on the show or not, but it's not worth a shit right now. I can't post at all right now. So if anybody from my page is here watching me, I do exist. I am alive, but my phone just will not let me post anything. It won't let me save videos. It won't let me do anything. So in regards to content, this is really the only thing right now I have out there. So there you go, folks. I'm here on the internet, of course.
He has not disappeared. He's okay. The phone's not okay, but he himself is okay.
Yes, that's right.
But this is happening.
There we go. I was gonna say you have the technology issues now. I thought that was on my end for sure.
No, okay, we're good. So I was gonna say though, you've been covering the Celtics for years, and this isn't the first time something like this has happened to you now.
No, it happened in 2018 in February of that year. So 2017-18 season. It was right around. Actually, like if people are real OG followers, I actually talked about this on my story back then. It was right between the Pistons game whenever we played them in February. It was somewhere around February 18th, somewhere in there. I didn't get to cover that game back then. And then last year in 2021, there were 3 games I missed because of phone issues as well. So definitely this is, I guess, a recurring issue that's going to happen every 2 years. But eventually it'll be solved. But I'm glad to be here today to talk about the NBA and not have to deal with technology and storage.
Right.
Just have to talk into a mic today.
Well, listen. The Celtics last night, we'll start out east and work our way out to the west. But the Celtics last night, if you caught the game, not even if you're just a Celtics fan, just if you caught the game in general, Celtics-Knicks is kind of one of those all-time classic rivalries. If you have NBA TV, you definitely caught the game. It was a doozy. I mean, the Celtics broke a franchise record 27 made three-pointers last night. The Celtics look a little bit more fluent on the offensive end. The offense has not been the problem. Kind of total polar opposites from last year. Last season, the problem was the offense for the Celtics. It was the turnovers. They didn't have depth. They didn't have guys who could consistently make shots like they do this year. Now it's a little, like I said, polar opposites. Now it's the defense that's the issue, and the offense looks to have taken a complete leap, and they look really sharp, really solid. Seamus, did you catch last night's game at all? I mean, the Celtics really played with very fluent.
I mean, I saw they made 27 threes last night. I can't say that I indulged myself into the entire game the way I'm used to, but I did see what happened during the game last night, and I completely agree with your point on the fact the Celtics defense, even the last 2 games, the Celtics have put up a lot of points. They've still given up a lot of points at the same time, and that's completely, I agree, polar opposite from last year, where the defense last year was really, really great early on in the season, and the offense just didn't come along until later on down the line. But I am surprised a little bit that the defense has been this bad this early because of how good they were defensively all of last year. I do wonder if the absence of Ime Udoka does have something to do with that a little bit. Offensively, I can see why we're so good. We have a lot of ball movement in there. The system is implemented. We create good shots all over the place. That's not too surprising to me that we're good on offense this year compared to last year. But the defense, That is certainly surprising. Those are two aspects of the game that are, of course, you build over time, offense and defense. But defensively, I do expect that to get better, but the fact that we're just so bad early on just doesn't make too much sense to me right now because of who we have on the roster. But another thing to say about that too, no Robert Williams. And I think right now that's proving itself. No Robert Williams to be, he might have been the defensive player of the year last year. They gave it to Smart, but it could have been Robert Williams. We're seeing the results now. He plays a big part in why they're bad defensively, but still, with Tatum, Brown, Brogdon,
Right.
White, Smart, you would expect them to be a little bit better.
Right. And to be honest with you, I'm not even throwing excuses. I'm not really going to throw in that Robert Williams excuse. And I'm not saying you are, because obviously Robert Williams is undoubtedly a huge missing piece. We even saw it at times last season when the Celtics were the best defensive team. They lapsed without Robert Williams. I don't think fans understand and realize how important Robert Williams is to that lineup. But to me, the Celtics really need to figure this. And I get we're only 9 games in, but the Celtics really need to figure out this defensive lapse and everything. And I think they slowly are. I saw improvements last night against the Knicks. Now, is the Knicks, the best team in the league? Hell no. But at the same time, you take any given improvements on any given night. We saw a little bit against Chicago, but like you said, we're scoring all these points and we have these solid defensive possessions, yet we're still giving up a lot of points as well. We had to score 133 points to beat the New York Knicks 118 points last night. But somebody I want to talk about, Rob, something I want to talk about is the fact that last night, obviously Gallinari and Robert Williams, two big guys, they've been out all season for the Celtics. They plan to be out for a longer period of time. No Horford last night. No Luke Cornett last night. He was a very late scratch due to personal reasons. The Celtics needed not only depth, they needed centers. They needed big men. Blake Griffin got the start. He played about 15 minutes, had a solid game with the starters, 7 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists. And then came in Vonleh, 16 minutes, 7 rebounds, 7 points, shot the ball well. Grant Williams, Sam Hauser, Malcolm Brogdon, those guys all off the bench, 50 bench points. What does that say about this team, Seamus, that compared to last year, we couldn't really imagine something like this?
Well, it was pretty well evident from the first preseason game once our bench came to the game that our bench could be a starting unit elsewhere. And so far this season, that's been something that's popped out to me a lot is the fact every time the bench comes into the game, something positive seems to happen. It's weird to see that this year, some of the errant moments the Celtics have had in terms of maybe giving up a lead or just simply, throwing away a game. I shouldn't say throwing away a game because we saw a lot of games thrown away last year. But this year, the 2 Cavs games in overtime, the moments in which the Celtics lose the game, it's usually the starters who are out on the floor. It's usually the top guys who are out on the floor. And that to me, is a little bit comforting. The fact that the bench is playing really, really well and you can get production out of them. And two, if somebody goes out in the starting lineup like Robert Williams did, you have somebody from the bench to slot into the starting lineup. And later on in the season, the starters are going to continuously get better and better and better. So the bench play from early on, this bench unit might be one of the best, if not the best, in the NBA in terms of just sheer depth on who the Celtics have on their roster. But not only that, they're playing really, really well as a unit right now. And that is certainly something you like to see early in the season, considering this is only going to build later on in time.
And somebody who obviously we're not denying the fact that Malcolm Brogdon's on that bench because he's your guy. You've been saying it since 2018, his rookie year, that this is exactly a guy the Celtics is missing. And that's with all the rosters we've had since 2018. But I want to bring up Sam Hauser, right? Because Sam Hauser has had this interesting career, went undrafted. Celtics took a chance on him in the summer league his rookie year, then signed him to a 2-way deal. Last year at the deadline, we had 5 open roster spots. Celtics extended his deal, they made a new deal, converted his 2-way into a standard contract, and then obviously this season converted his contract into a 3-year deal, made a new deal. And what obviously the front office, the coaching staff, they believe in Sam Hauser. They've seen this from day one. And then last night, could you imagine, Seamus, your career high not only came in a win, but it came in a win against the New York Knicks at Madison Square Garden. I mean, that must be so relieving. Obviously, players played off like, oh, it was a team victory, the team played well, but there's going to be a part of Sam Hauser inside that's kind of, shaking right now, saying, I can't believe I just did that. 17 points was a career high for Hauser in 21 minutes. Seamus, his minutes have increased. This is a whole new year for Sam Hauser. What have you seen from Sam Hauser, especially these last couple of games?
I believe I mentioned it before the season, and people disagreed with me on my live. They thought I was crazy that Sam Hauser being on the roster and, of course, Malcolm Brogdon and Derek White being there as well as ball handlers, they make the roster not so friendly of a place for Peyton Pritchard. And right now, I believe Sam Hauser is stepping into that Peyton Pritchard role we saw last season, although now as a wing and a forward, rather, although, they play sort of the same role, being that spark plug scorer from the perimeter, hitting a couple threes when they enter the game. Of course, we saw Sam Hauser, he enters the game a little bit different. Peyton Pritchard was usually that beginning of the fourth quarter guy, second quarter guy. Now Sam Hauser, he's somewhere in the middle there. But Sam Hauser has completely taken over that role of someone who can just come off the bench, make a couple of threes, put some points up on the board right quick. And that's his impact pretty much at the end of the day, being a perimeter shooter, spacing the floor, and making shots. The other night, I don't remember what game this was exactly, but Sam Hauser, he came in. I believe he went 3 of 5 from the floor, 3 of 5 from three, made three threes, scored 9 points. Those are 9 points right there. If you're scoring 100, say we score 100 points in a game, which we're putting up more than that right now. If you don't have Sam Hauser's points, you're only putting up 91. It's like those little efforts, just not only from Hauser, but from the bench as a whole. Those are the efforts in which the Celtics, they're not asking, of course, for 20 point, 17-point performances out of Sam Hauser each night. It's just those constant little shots along the way and the ability to space the floor that's been so huge for both him, Hauser, filling a role on this team, and of course the Celtics as a whole utilizing him in that way. Sam Hauser, he's been great for the Celtics last year, and it's so ironic now. I wrote that piece last year. If the Celtics don't plan on actually playing their shooters, because last year Sam Hauser and Matt Ryan didn't play, we didn't actually add any shooting.
Correct.
Well, nowadays, Sam Hauser, it worked out pretty well in the long run. We have some shooting nowadays.
It's funny because of two things. First of all, that's one thing I say about Blake Griffin, and I'm not saying that he should be playing these high minutes, but what I'm saying is when Blake could come in for Al Horford, Robert Williams, Danilo Gallinari, when he could come in and play those 10 to 15 minutes, and if he could get those 7 points, the 3 rebounds, and a couple of assists, along with some key rebounds, diving on loose ball, that's what you need. Obviously, we would love to get the 35 points in 20 minutes, Blake Griffin, that we've seen years ago, but that's just not going to happen. That's just not going to happen, and we need to accept that. And just like your point with Sam Hauser, if we could get these guys coming in off the bench, those 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 points, those become so huge and so crucial, especially when guys like Al Horford are out of the lineup and the Celtics are in need of somebody to come in, especially – you never know. What if one of the Jays goes down and Malcolm Brogdon's going to have to play some big minutes? Sam Hauser's going to have to play some big minutes. So it's really good to see the Celtics as a whole come out and score 50 bench points. Their bench has been solid since the preseason. You mentioned it. And then to my second point, it's funny because this wasn't scripted at all, but you mentioned Peyton Pritchard. And I was about to ask you about Peyton Pritchard because, look, the guard position on the Celtics, it's just so deep, right? We have Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, Malcolm Brogdon, Derek White, even throw in Jason Tatum at that position. That doesn't leave room for Peyton Pritchard, especially when that 8th, 9th man, Sam Hauser, Luke Cornett, play the way that they play. What do you think is going to how is this going to unfold with Pritchard? I understand, when your opportunity comes, it comes, but the clock is ticking for sure for Peyton Pritchard.
I believe he's essentially going to be somebody who's on the end of the bench. I don't want to say, because last year we kind of said this with him as well, where he's a developmental player on the end of the bench and you can bring him in at spots. And he, of course, filled the role with that team last year. But the NBA and sports in general is a volatile place, and people are always trying to replace you. Always, always, always. Even Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, there are dudes trying to replace him every single day. And Peyton
Right.
Pritchard, you look at the Celtics roster right now, the, Peyton Pritchard, he did fill a role for the Celtics last year, but you look at his game log in the playoffs, and it's clear they couldn't trust him over and over and over again. And as time went on, his minutes dwindled. And that's because
Correct.
simply his size. His size. He's a great ball handler, a great shooter, but defensively, he's going to be hunted every single possession he's out on the floor. And you look at a guy like Sam Hauser, who's kind of taken over that eighth, ninth man role. He's somebody who's a little bit bigger. He's a wing. He's almost 6'7". He can hold his own defensively, although last year he wasn't all that good. He's improved a lot this year to become at least a decent defender. And in that regard, he's just been better than Pritchard. And I don't know what the Celtics do exactly with Pritchard moving forward. I think this is just going to be a situation where I don't want to say benched entirely, but he's going to be the 10th, 11th, 12th man instead of the 8th or ninth man like he was last year. And I see the year playing out like that and them keeping him on the bench unless there is some type of otherworldly trade offer out there for him. But I simply don't see that at this point, knowing Peyton Pritchard and his limits on the floor. Of course, we know he's a solid basketball player, but at the end of the day, can you consistently slot him in to that role and win the championship? Or is he going to fill that role better than someone like Sam Hauser? And I think right now the answer is unfortunately no.
Then we have to move on, but really quick, I do want to ask you is, could you see realistically a, such type of situation with Peyton Pritchard that we might have saw with Aaron Nesmith, where Pritchard is shopped to a young rebuilding team where he gets minutes? Because I said this, I was a big Nesmith fan, you know that. Nesmith, in my opinion, was too good to play in the G League, yet not good enough to get consistent rotational minutes. I don't want to say not good enough because I don't want to make it sound like I'm friggin' better than these guys. I'm not. But at the same time, it's kind of true. Could that be the same with Pritchard? Because we saw this in Summer League. Peyton Pritchard couldn't play in Summer League because he was just torching teams in Summer League. The Celtics pulled him and then only brought him back as the championship. Could you see something like that with Peyton Pritchard, him getting shipped out to one of these young teams where he can get minutes?
I think this situation personally is a little bit different just because of the fact we know Peyton Pritchard can contribute if he's asked to do so. And I believe that creates a path for him to actually stay on the roster, even though he might be the 10th or 11th man on the roster and he won't play every single night or he won't play in the playoffs. It's still nice to have that player at the end of your roster that you know can contribute. And also, they have him under a $2 million deal next year, which is just, really, really cheap for a guy who can consistently contribute if you wanted him to or needed him to. I would say it's a little bit different with Nesmith, considering the fact Nesmith, he still needed to develop further, and you knew you couldn't rely on him at moments. Peyton Pritchard, you can't rely on him consistently over time, but you can slot him in there a couple minutes at a time and feel comfortable if you needed him to. Aaron Nesmith, every time he was slotted into the lineup, it was, hope this goes well. Hope this goes well. He had great moments, of course, and we wanted him to see more and more of him, but you couldn't necessarily rely on him, and there wasn't necessarily anything the Celtics could do in terms of development for him. But I would say Peyton Pritchard, he's a more NBA ready player at this point in time, although he might not be above some of the players now who are sitting in the 8th, 9th spot on the roster. I still think he's a valuable player to have at the end of the roster if they potentially need to slot him in because of how cheap his deal is and because of the fact we know he is a developed player and not somebody who, we're throwing our hands up and saying, hope this goes well.
Right. And I guess that just also goes to show you how deep this Celtics roster actually is, because typically your 13th man, similar to Peyton Pritchard, isn't as good as Peyton Pritchard is. That's just a fact. That's just how it is. But we got to move on. The Celtics 6-3 sit at third in the Eastern Conference. They got a big game on Monday night, 9:00 p.m. against Ja Morant and the Memphis Grizzlies. Let's head over to their arch enemy at the moment, the defending champions Golden State Warriors, where they sit 3-7 through 10 games, the 13th seed in the West, on a 5-game losing streak. Losses included to the Hornets, losses included to the Pistons, the Magic, the Pelicans, who, yes, that's a tougher team for sure, but definitely a winnable game. They are struggling right now, the Pistons as well. And look, their offense seems to not be the problem. They're fourth in points per game. They're second in assists per game. It's been their defense. Their defense is absolutely atrocious. 30th in opponents' points per game, 121.4. That's dead last in the league. There's only 30 teams in the league. That is dead last. They're 27th in rebounding, 40 rebounds a game. Seamus, what is going on for these Golden State Warriors? Because we kind of questioned, okay, with this whole Draymond Green, Jordan Poole situation, would that affect them? They come out 2-1 throughout the first week, and we go, okay, they're fine. And then all of a sudden now they're losing to lottery teams, and all of a sudden Golden State is becoming a lottery team through just 10 games.
Yeah, Golden State, I think an underrated aspect of their team from last year that simply left and they replaced them with different people is the fact Otto Porter and Gary Payton left their team last year. They replaced them with JaMychal Green and Dante DiVincenzo. Now, JaMychal Green and Dante DiVincenzo, they're solid players, but you just look at Otto Porter and Gary Payton, what they did for the Warriors last year. They got deals elsewhere. Other teams signed them because of how good they were with the Warriors last year. And I do believe the Warriors, you said offensively, or you mentioned offensively, they are doing well this season, but defensively, that is where they've taken a big hit. Otto Porter, he's a big body defensively. Gary Payton, I thought he should have been in the Defensive Player of the Year running last year, and that's crazy to say. He could have won it. The next guard to win it could have been another Gary Payton if it wasn't Marcus Smart last year. But I see, they lost those two players. I thought those were two big losses for them, and they replaced them with players they're still trying to gel with. And I do think their team is going to come along later on down the line because that's what we saw last year with them a little bit. Last year, we think about the two finals teams. The Celtics and the Warriors looked like a mess in January last year. They really did. Draymond Green was missing games. The Warriors looked like a mess, and yet they were able to right the ship. Steph Curry, of course, went on a tear when he was slumping last season. After he was slumping last season, he went on a tear, and they ended up making the finals. I expect some of the same with this Warriors team. I expect them to gel over time, but I will say this is a little bit older of a Warriors team. They are leaning a little bit more on those young guys now, and some of those established veterans who were there last year aren't quite there anymore. And I think the Warriors this year, they might take a step back, but I do expect them to be there in the end when it's all said and done, despite the fact they started 3-7, which under any circumstances looks hellacious.
And that's the thing about the NBA. It's funny because any team on any given night could win a basketball game, right? And when we do our daily pick'ems, Seamus, I try to look at both sides as best as I can say, and I try to believe that any team could pull off anything nowadays. I mean, like we saw Oklahoma City Thunder the other night beat the Clippers twice, and the Dallas Mavericks came back from, these teams all of a sudden. Pistons, Orlando, both beat Golden State. Are we concerned, or should Golden State be concerned about these losses to these teams? I know they're 10 games in. I know they've lost games before. It's not the end of the world. I know, like you said, in January, these Celtics and Warriors, the two teams who were at the end, they sucked in January. But do you think there's a little worry, like, what the hell's going on here? Like, we're the defending champs and we're letting these teams run all over us.
Well, I mean, of course, there's got to be some type of worry because, teams, I will say regular season games at the beginning of the year in October, November, December, they're probably not taken quite as seriously as games later on in the year. And we've seen teams of the past who have made it to the championship or to the finals or won the championship, right? Like the Warriors, like the Cavs in the past, and even just Kawhi Leonard right now, who we're seeing, they typically don't take the regular season too seriously, and they sometimes scale it back. But I will say there's always something to be said about the ramp up within the regular season and consistently gaining cohesiveness with your team over time. The Warriors, they're looking at this and they're not panicking right now, but of course they know they need to fix it and that this cannot continue. They can't just go on the season and be mediocre and say, okay, well, when we get to the playoffs, we're good. They're going to have to try and reconcile that as much as they can before the playoffs, but they're not panicking at all. They're probably not worried at all. There's a ton of time until the playoffs, but they know within their clubhouse that this needs to fix itself and they need to make that effort within the regular season to make that happen before the playoffs come, which of course still a long, long way away. But I will say the Warriors, they're not worried right now, but they will fix this.
I want to ask you about Draymond Green because Draymond Green has been known as a very vocal leader. Over the past summer, obviously, we remember the pool incident. It's not the first time that Draymond Green has kind of, I guess, over expressed himself in the locker room. Um, Now we heard in the offseason Draymond thinks he deserves a max contract from the Golden State Warriors. Warriors aren't giving him a max contract. Now all of a sudden, trade rumors are rumors. That you don't always believe what you hear or see online for sure. But does that raise an eyebrow to you? Could you see Draymond Green in another uniform other than Golden State?
If we ever saw Draymond Green in another uniform, it would be like seeing Patrick Ewing in a Magic uniform or Hakeem Olajuwon in a Raptors uniform. It's just it doesn't. I don't feel as if Draymond will make the same impact elsewhere as he makes in Golden State. Number one, in Golden State, he has two of the best shooters of all time, potentially right next
Right.
to him, Klay Thompson and Steph Curry. And he holds some leadership seniority in Golden State. I will say, when the Warriors first made the finals, started making their runs back in 13, 14, 15 was the first year they won the finals, but they were
Right.
making runs before that, or trying to at least. Draymond was just the young guy, right? He was just the young guy. And now it's developed into this world in which, even during the championship years, he was the young guy.
Mm.
Now it's developed into a world in which he is the definitive leader within the locker room, and whoever steps into that locker room is going to answer to Draymond Green. And I don't think, say, if you traded him to somewhere like the Lakers, right? Say he were to be traded to somewhere like the Lakers, does he receive that same respect out of different players within that clubhouse as he did in Golden State? And we've seen with Draymond Green, if he doesn't really receive that level of respect or receive, what he wants at the end of the day, or the excellence that his standards that he wants for his standards, if that isn't met, he's kind of a loose cannon. He's kind of a loose cannon, and I don't know if today's day and age of players, he is like that. Draymond Green is like that, and has worked because of his situation that he's in. But I don't know if every single player coming into the league nowadays, and I think a majority of the players nowadays, don't necessarily respond too well with Draymond's messaging. And I will say too, with Draymond, over the years, Draymond has seemed like a genuine person
Mm.
within the media, and I will say that's true. That being said, I do think at this point in time, he does, well, from this pool incident rather, he takes it a little bit too far, to the point of he's creating this persona about himself that isn't quite genuine anymore. And that's
Right.
kind of just the weird evolving world of Draymond Green and the Warriors, is that it's almost like what we talk about with the Warriors in years past. It's almost like we're entering a new age in how to talk about Draymond Green and the Warriors, because this isn't going to be some like kumbaya situation like it's been in the past. They still have the implemented pieces in which can bring them a championship again. I mean, they only have 4 titles. Michael Jordan won 6. I'm sure people were talking about Michael Jordan in this light too. But I will, like, the Warriors, they have the pieces to get back to the title. They know how to get back to the title. But this is a different day and age. Each year it's going to get harder and harder as they get older and older. We're seeing with older superstars around. Kevin Durant, LeBron, their teams are at the bottom of the conferences.
Mm.
Bottom of the conferences right now. So is Steph Curry's. I still think the Warriors are going to be good in the long run, but I will say this is going to be harder and harder and harder as time moves on, and as more incidents rack up, or if more incidents rack up, like the Jordan Poole Draymond incident, you're going to hear more rumbles about Draymond Green potentially moving elsewhere. And if he were to move elsewhere, I think that would just simply be an ending of an era per se, as Draymond Green being somebody who's in the limelight as a top player in the league or assisting top players in the league. I think you would end up seeing him not fail necessarily in his next situation, but certainly not receive the same success or achieve the same success as he's achieving in Golden State.
Is Klay Thompson a warrior for life? We've heard many reports saying that the Cavs did not offer him a contract extension. Is that something to kind of, again, raise an eyebrow about, or don't look past that?
I wouldn't necessarily, when the Warriors are not paying their players, the Draymond and Klay Thompson, there is a side of me that wonders if the Warriors we saw two scenarios. We've seen two scenarios play out in the past. You either pay your old star players and kind of bite the bullet, and you may not be competitive for the waning moments of their career, but you've taken care of the star players. They've been there for years. We saw this with the Lakers with Kobe Bryant. They
Right.
pretty much maxed him out, and the rest of the roster wasn't all that great afterwards. And Kobe Bryant in what 2012, 13, 14 range, right before he retired, when he's having all the injury issues, he wasn't, of course, out there enough to be as effective of a player. Same thing with Klay Thompson and Draymond Green, where these two players, they're getting super max money. Not only are they getting max money, they're getting super max money. And I'm not quite certain their ability reaches super max levels anymore, but it's almost like they won 4 championships. What do you do
Right.
with them here? And I don't necessarily think that the Warriors won't pay them because of that reason. Even when I say it out loud, when we go into this topic, I think maybe the Warriors won't pay them. But when you say it out loud, I do believe the Warriors will eventually pay them again. That being said, is that going to be the right move for them to win the championship? I don't know, but I do think they'll eventually take care of their star players because they've already brought them 4.
Right. And we see these young players that they have within the system that they really trust. They really want to trust. Moses Moody, Jonathan Kaminga, James Wiseman. We see these guys and Jordan Poole, obviously. And you know, we've seen games this year where if they've struggled, games that the Warriors starters actually put them up big, and then the bench goes in, and these young guys. I mean, I understand that it's a learning process, but um, there seems to be a little bit concern with these young guys that one, they can't ever stay healthy, and two, they have trouble I guess functioning with these big leads that it forces the guys like Steph, Clay, Draymond, the older guys have to go back in and try to close out the game, put a little bit more extra effort. Is that concerning to you, not only, as for Warriors fans, but just as an NBA watcher, an NBA reporter, just kind of looking at the situation that they have going on right now?
Yeah, it's a bit weird with the Warriors because if you look at their team, it's almost like they have more depth in a certain light because
Right.
they're trying to rely on these young guys a little bit more. But at the same time, I said earlier that they got rid of Otto Porter and Gary Payton, brought in 2 new players who might be a little bit below their level, still
Mm,
trying to gel with them, and you're trying to add in the young players right now. I believe if the young players develop the way they should, especially Kaminga and Wiseman, this team is going to be great in the long run. They're going to be really, really good. But I think there's always going to be some learning years and some growing pains. And I do think right now, potentially this is a year in which they can't rely on their young guys all the way to go and bring them a championship or to, assist them rather in that journey because we're seeing it early on. There's still growing pains when you're a young player in the NBA, no matter what team you're on, but even if you're on the Warriors, and no matter what situation you're in. Because there's always, even Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum, they weren't putting up 30 points a game right away, even in their second season. Second season, I believe what Jonathan Kuminga's in his second year now. Tatum, that was one of his worst seasons. I would argue Tatum's rookie season was better than his second year. So you're going to have these young players take these slumps, take these moments of learning and developing. And I don't know if this year if the Warriors can necessarily rely on those young guys, but you would hope later on down the line that they can. But I will say with the Warriors as a whole, looking at all the other teams in the NBA, especially the Celtics who they played in the finals last year, we're almost in a different mode now as Celtics fans where instead of looking at all the other Eastern Conference teams, which of course we still are, we're kind of looking out West still.
right.
We're expecting maybe to make the finals again. And the Warriors, compare the two teams right now. The Warriors, I will say, like I said, it's almost like they have more depth to their team because they're trying to add in the young guys, but at the same time, they don't have quite as reliable as depth as some of these other teams who have gelled together over time already, and of course have just more veteran players on their roster. But the Warriors, I think that's just going to be a situation that plays itself out over time. Hasn't been a good start. I think this could potentially be last year was a little bit rocky, but this could be one of their rockier years because of how much they're relying on the young guys and because of the fact each of their superstars are a year older now and they just came off a championship. We'll have to see what happens with the Warriors moving forward. But all of these different aspects of the Warriors, I do think eventually, all these concerns with the bench and the young guys and the chemistry of the team as a whole and their stars being a little bit older and Draymond's leadership, I feel like there's going to be a point in time, because there seems to be every year, where we're going to look back at this video and go, yep, it was the Warriors. It was the Warriors. They just had it the whole time. They had all these problems. We thought, hell, 3-7, who knows about the Warriors? And then they'll be the number one seed at the end of the year. Something like that will happen. But the Warriors do need to get it going just a little bit before they make that happen.
Right. And I did want to mention something to highlight the Warriors. I guess 5-game losing streak, even though there's nothing to highlight, like about like 5 games in a row that losing against the teams they lost to, that sucks. But at the same time, going back, talking about staying on the topic of their young players, trying to get their trust, trying to give them experience, getting them playing time. I guess this stretch of 5 games was the perfect, I guess, way to do that, where it's 1, early in the season, and 2, you're going up against teams that won't really be there at the end. These are lottery teams, and if they're not lottery teams, they're either low play-in or miss the play-in. Guys, teams like the Hornets, the Pistons, the Pelicans, the Magic, these guys have young teams that run up and down the court. Maybe the Warriors, their core and Draymond and Curry and who am I missing? Clay, Andre Iguodala, who hasn't been playing. That's time for them to take, I guess, some rest in the early season. I know the season just started, but I guess that's the perfect opponents to play those young guys and get those young guys some reps, if you know what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with that point as well. And this is where teams, it's almost like a pick and choose nowadays, because the old method of just playing 82 games all year and playing the entire playoffs and doing that year after year after year, we see with certain players that just takes a toll on their body. It just does. We've seen that it was the Spurs, the first team who really, the Spurs used to be advanced. They used to be ahead of everybody else. They used to be ahead of the curve. Although now you look at the Spurs and it seems like they're behind everybody else for their philosophies. They're kind of stuck in the mud. But when the Spurs were ahead, they were the first team who realized that, hey, if we don't play our star players certain games throughout the season, we're eventually going to get that production within their knees and their joints and all that. We're going to preserve that for later on down the line. And I think nowadays every team has pretty much adopted that in some light, because they realize these players, they go from playing AAU and basketball since they were 6 years old, essentially every single day, all the way up until the NBA. These players are playing more and more and more. You want them to be available at the end of the year. And the Warriors know they want them to be available at the end of the year. And it's all about a picking and choosing. Some people, of course, you see some teams, they get it going right away. The Milwaukee Bucks, Giannis, they're 9-0 right now, rolling. And then later in the season, you might see in March, February, March, in that range, when we do get a little bit closer to the playoffs and they have their seeding a little bit more established, they might rest Giannis and Middleton a little bit more. And it's always just it's just a pick and choose when you want to play and rest people. The Warriors, this is a good time of the season to experiment for any team. Right now, I will say it does seem like, I don't know how we get caught up in this every single year, but every single year it's like we get caught up in, okay, what matters right now will matter later on down the line, or this will persist. But there's always a turning point. There's always development that goes on later on in time. And I think right now, early in the season, that is why partially talking about in regards to the Warriors, that's why I give hope to them, of course, going forward. Even though they're 3-7, this has been, I want to say, their worst start probably in the championship era, maybe outside of 2019-20, because they missed Steph Curry most of that year. This has been one of their worst starts, but in reality, they have so many more games to develop. And right now, it's just an experimental period in the NBA for almost every team. The Bucks were 9-0, the Cavs were 7-1, the Warriors are 3-7. That could all change by the end of the season. But if the trends continue out as they are now, to some extent, if some of these problems persist later on in the season, which sometimes they do, you'll see the Warriors, they'll drop down the standings a little bit. They might not be as meaty this year. And of course, we'll have to see how they play out later on in the season, because they are a team that likes to rest their players a lot, and maybe in the later moments of the season, but they haven't necessarily had a moment except for, I want to say, 2021, where they really had to fight for playoff seeding to get into the bracket in which they want to get into. So that'll be an interesting aspect of the Warriors. And it all has to do, of course, with resting players, who you're playing on each night. And it's just going to be interesting moving forward to see what exactly happens with these certain problems, and of course when they decide to experiment and not, because thus far, if this has been truly the experimental period for the Warriors, it ain't going too well.
Well, look, we have a good second half of the show coming up. We still have about 15-20 minutes of the show. Seamus, you're going to take the reins. This is unexpected. You're going to take the reins of the second half of the show. You have some teams you want to talk about. We got away with the Celtics and Warriors, two teams who, yes, they've had their struggles to come to start the season, but they are both expected to be there in the end. But first, before Seamus and I take on the second half of the show, why don't we hear from Wyatt? He's got a couple messages for you on things going around. Good time.
Guys, what's up? If you don't know me, my name's Wyatt. This whole thing, good time, that's me. I hope you guys are enjoying the Lowe Zone as much as I am. I'm just here to tell you about what else we got going on here at Good Time. Every day, noon Eastern time, we're live. I'm live right here on the Bum. Tune in. We talk about literally everything. It's basically a show predicated on what you want to talk about. You see these lovely people over here or over here. I honestly don't know which side it's on. One of these sides, there's a list of our A-listers. Those are the top 10 people who hang out with us every day, ask questions, donate, tip, whatever. They hang out with us, and I love them to death. And you, too, can be on the A-list if you want. Hang out with me every day at noon. Also, every Monday, we have Battle Flicks, hosted by the lovely Eli Hedrick. Good dude. Good-looking dude. Great stash. We got a lot of stuff going. And guess what? One thing's for certain. It'll always be a good time. Back to the show.
Welcome back into the Lowe Zone, everybody. I'm Justin Lowe alongside Seamus Zarlingo. Talked about the Celtics, talked about the Warriors. Seamus, take the reins. What do we got going on around the association?
Well, I want to talk about two teams in which everyone thought were going to be terrible. Maybe is a good word for it. Terrible coming into the season. Yet looking at both of their rosters and the production in which they put up thus far, these teams might be playoff teams, and maybe not so later in the season. Maybe they decided to tank, and maybe this is just some talk that just dissipates into the air. But the Utah Jazz and the Portland Trailblazers are two teams in which look like legitimate basketball teams, especially the Blazers. Of course, they have the star power and Damian Lillard there, but the Utah Jazz, this is a random configuration of role players and young guys Danny Ainge acquired. This looks like the 2013-14 Celtics. This is essentially what this team looks like, where you have these okay, solid role players, may not be the best role players in the world, but they come together and form this team of cohesiveness that kind of works in today's NBA compared to some of the other competition that's out there right now at the bottom of the West. That, hey, some of these teams, like we're talking about, the Warriors, and of course the Lakers too, these teams may not be as good in today's NBA era as some of these other teams who have just been kind of thrown together. They have cohesiveness. They have sort of the modern day NBA player per se, right? And they have the pieces in which can make a dent in the standings. They can't. I don't think the Blazers and Jazz are winning any championships anytime soon, but they can undoubtedly, at the end of the year, if we saw them in the 7, 8, 9, 10 seed, if we saw them in the play-in tournament, I would not be surprised, especially the Portland Trailblazers. It seems like they continue. I don't know, this is almost a positive and a negative light. We thought they were going to be a little bit worse, but they're going to be a little bit better, but they're still in that pool of mediocrity. They're still going to be, I believe, that 7, 8, 9 seed somewhere in there. The Utah Jazz, I believe their team is going to be shipped later on down the line in February. I think Danny Ainge is going to be on the phone a little bit in February with them. That being said, you look at the team they have now, they have a couple of good wings. They have Malik Beasley. They have Rudy Gay, who's still giving them a little bit of production. Lauri Markkanen in the starting lineup. You have Colin Sexton there coming off the bench. Mike Conley, who's a veteran point guard. You have pieces there. You have legitimate pieces there, young pieces too. Walker Kessler is another name that comes to mind. With the Jazz, you have legitimate pieces there that can go out and win a couple of ball games, make a dent in the standings. But I ultimately think this team's going to be sold later on down the line, which makes me a little bit sad knowing that this Jazz team, although solid right now, all making a little bit of noise, beating some of the teams in which expect to be at the top of the standings. Although they're doing that right now, I do believe this team is going to be sold later on in the season. But for the moment and for the time being, one has to enjoy what the Utah Jazz and the Portland Trail Blazers are doing out west unexpectedly to start the season. Will this last? Maybe not. But considering their records, no one thought that this would be the beginning of both of these teams, especially the way both were constructed, which was haphazardly, to say the least.
Right. Right, and I talked about the Utah Jazz a lot on last week's episode of the Lowe Zone. You guys can go check it out. But the Utah Jazz, and something along with the Portland Trailblazers, and I talked about it. I even talked about the Oklahoma City Thunder as well, is why we're seeing these successful young teams be so successful early on. Is because I really think these young players and these mixed in with a couple of vets on the team. Obviously, you still have Clarkson and Conley on and Rudy Gay on the Jazz, and then you also see you have Damian Lillard and Nurkic on the Portland Trailblazers. Is that these players are buying into what these vets and what these coaches and what these front offices are trying to send out. Right? They are rebuilding teams. They know they're not going to go to the finals. They know they're not going to be winning anything kind of anytime soon. But at the same time, they want to build a winning culture from the very start, even if that means they're only winning 20 to 30 games per season in these next couple of years. But these players are buying into what the organizations are putting out there, and it's working out really, really well for some of these young franchises. Even the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are, I think they're 4-5, but even them, they've had some really solid performances. And I'm just very impressed with what the Utah Jazz have been able to do. Give huge credit to rookie head coach, Will Hardy, because he has done a phenomenal job in the Utah Jazz organization to start off. Give credit to Chauncey Billups out there in Portland. He had some really good moments last season for the Portland Trailblazers. And it's just really good to see, like I said last year, I stressed it so much. It's really good to see these rebuilding teams, even though they're probably not going to be here 60 to 70 games from now. It's really good to see these young teams get a good start, build some confidence. A lot of these kids are making a name for themselves. You mentioned Walker Kessler, who's had a great start to the season. Obviously, Kelly Olynyk's a veteran. We know him in Boston, but Kelly Olynyk has become a huge reason as to why the Utah Jazz are 7-3. Obviously, Lauri Markkanen and Colin Sexton coming off of that Cleveland trade. I personally thought when that trade happened, it was great for both franchises. I really did. I'm not sitting here saying I thought the Jazz would be 7-3 in their first 10 games, but I'm also not going to tell you that I didn't think it was a great trade for both franchises. It really, really was. And then same thing with Portland, the way that they've been able to kind of bounce back. They acquired Gary Payton, the second-year guy in free agency. That was a huge free agent pickup. Now, are the Portland Trailblazers going to be here where they are at 60 to 70 games? Probably not. But like you said, if they were anywhere between the 7 and 10 seed play-in spot / bottom of the playoff seeding, that's really successful for these young teams like the Trailblazers, like the Utah Jazz. Even throw in the Cavaliers, who have the potential to be not even a playoff team this year, but a top 3 seed this year. So it's really exciting and thrilling. I said this a lot on last week's episode, so I don't have too much thought on it because honestly, not much has changed. Like the Utah Jazz are consistently playing good basketball, even in their losses. They beat Memphis twice. I'm trying to just look at their roster, and I'm not really seeing anybody crazy on their roster talent-wise in terms of like these big-name players. Obviously, Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert are now gone. Teams thought that these guys would crumble and maybe these guys would be 0-10 to start the season, but that's totally not true. And I'm just really glad to see that these young guys and a lot of these young franchises are buying into what these young teams are kind of distributing.
Yeah, we'll say something about the Utah Jazz too. That situation, from all indications of everybody who was there last season and what they're playing like now elsewhere,
Right.
it appears that situation was completely toxic last year, and you could see it in the moment. Donovan Mitchell, we should talk about the Cavs, because the Cavs, they're 7 and
Right.
1 right now. They look like a legitimate contender, not only in the East, but the NBA. They could win the
Mm,
entire thing this year,
mm,
no doubt. The Cleveland Cavaliers making that deal for Mitchell, Donovan Mitchell looks like a rejuvenated player. And that Utah Jazz situation, to me, was the reason in which he took a step back last year, and why that entire team last year didn't
right.
meet their standards. It was a toxic situation. So the Jazz coming into this year now, talking about the Jazz and Mitchell out in Cleveland, and you can talk about Gobert too in Minnesota, where all of these players and all these situations are increasingly going to become better over time. They've already become better because they've simply split them apart. Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell, they didn't like each other. That team last year didn't like each other. They didn't mesh well together. And once they split that up, new pieces came into Utah, new pieces who were not there last year, who have no idea about the situation at all. And of course, you insert Mitchell into a new situation, Gobert into a new winning situation, both of those winning situations. Everybody is going to be happier. And at the end of the day, that's really what we want here in the NBA. Last year, I hated watching the Utah Jazz. Hated, because they were
Mm,
one of my favorite teams to watch back when Mitchell first came into the league. In 2017-18, they were one of the most fun teams to watch, fun young team to watch. That was the first year they didn't have Hayward. And they were really, really fun. Yet last year, it was just a toxic mess. No one liked each other. They played some of the most inefficient basketball in the league.
very
And yet now,
selfish.
right, and now everybody's split up. They're in new situations. They love their new situations. And that's just what you like to see in the NBA. Everybody loving their situations and playing well within their situations, even though the Utah Jazz situation, we know that's probably not going to last forever, but it's the start of something ultimately good for them. And of course, they've had a good start in general, which is always something to feel great about.
Right. And I saw on JJ Redick's podcast, Donovan Mitchell was on it in the most recent episode, and he was kind of saying how before Danny Ainge essentially blew up the team this summer, Mitchell and Rudy Gobert apparently said that they didn't want to blow up the team and they wanted to try to, they wanted to figure this out. How much stock you buying into that? Are you buying, or
None.
is that just a try to get good with the media type situation?
Oh, that sounds like the get good with the media. Honestly, that's just saying something out in the media that they wanted it to work. Clearly, they didn't, because they were both traded away. They were both traded away. If star players want to be within a situation and they continuously iterate that over and over and over again and want to actually come together and form something good, you'll see what happens. What happens is something that happens in Boston, right? Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum are still around. I know we had a bunch of talks about them a couple years ago where, well, it wasn't us, it was other people. Who should the Celtics trade them, whatever, right? But these guys, they want to be in Boston, and they bought in. Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert did not want to be in Utah. They did not want to buy in. And if they wanted to buy in, they would have bought in last year when they were the number 5 seed against the Dallas Mavericks, who eventually made the Western Conference Finals. The Utah Jazz, they played the first 2 games without Luka Doncic
Mm,
and lost one of them. So the Utah Jazz, when I hear Donovan Mitchell say that, you hear players say a lot of things in the media sometimes that I don't know. I don't know why they feel the need to present themselves in this way when we know things were not good there last year. If anybody wants to go witness what I'm talking about right now, go watch the Utah Jazz's game. I believe it was their last game against the Warriors last year. One of their 3 games, I believe they played 3 games against the Warriors last year. One of their 2 or 3 games against the Warriors last year, the Warriors absolutely whooped them. Donovan Mitchell looked pissed the entire time. Rudy Gobert looked pissed. If anybody wants to go back and confirm Donovan Mitchell's um, statement of him wanting, or Rudy Gobert wanting to fix that situation in Utah, everybody should go back and look at that game and really decipher whether or not they really, really wanted to be there. Because in my mind, no effing way did Donovan Mitchell and Rudy
mm,
Gobert want to play with each other, especially after what we saw last year in terms of their inefficient style of basketball. Donovan Mitchell passing to Rudy Gobert twice and just the sheer emotion. Sometimes you just have to look at what the players are emoting out on the floor. After all that, one can easily come to the conclusion Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, they didn't want to play with each other. They didn't want to play in Utah. They wanted to go elsewhere and succeed with others who they could actually mesh and gel with, which, of course, now looks to be happening. So good for both of them, although they'll say, I'm sure to their grave, that they wanted it to work out in Utah. In some light, I bet they did, but they were not dedicated to that.
Well, we got a few minutes left here, Seamus. Why don't we talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers? Because these guys, I understand, Celtics fan sees my Celtics gear in the background, but as an NBA fan in general and somebody who's been covering the NBA, I'm really excited for this Cleveland Cavaliers team, especially not seeing LeBron there, Kyrie Irving there. Obviously, Kevin Love's still there, but he's not getting as many minutes, and he's having a great season, by the way. Just to see them have such success with these young stars who actually, and I say young stars, these guys are young and they're legitimately stars. They're not up and coming stars. These Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, even Jared Allen throw in there. These guys, Darius Garland, quite literally an all-star last year. These guys are legit. These guys aren't 8-1, 7-1. These guys, that's not beginning of the season crap. I legitimately believe that this Cavaliers team is legit. I believe they got back, was it Ricky Rubio, who was huge for them last year, was traded and then traded back to the Cavs or signed back with the Cavs. He's still out on injury, but he should be coming back. This team is legit, Seamus.
Undoubtedly. I believe you look at their entire team, they have the players in which match up well within a playoff series. I do worry a little bit about their wing depth, just a tad. They're playing Isaac Okoro and Dean Wade. But other than that, they have the big positions locked up, and they have the guard positions locked up as well. And they have guards, maybe outside of Darius Garland, who can really defend out there. And they have the length, in which makes up for a little bit of, them having more guards and bigs than wings. But I will say this Cavs team is undoubtedly legit. Undoubtedly. The only reason in which they didn't finish as a top 4 seed last year because of injuries.
Right.
Solely because of injuries. All of their injuries hampered them throughout the season to the point in which they were the 9th seed at the end of the year. Rather, they were the 8th seed, had to play the Brooklyn Nets, and, of course, lost in the play-in tournament. But if they don't suffer as many injuries last year, I think, could be looking at the Cavs as certainly in the same light as, say, the Memphis Grizzlies, who made the semifinals last year. They were second in the West, and we see them as a legitimate team now. The Cavs, they're almost this, I don't want to say up-and-coming team, because you mentioned they have legitimate stars, and they don't just have developing players. But in a certain light, they were at the bottom of the play-in last year, and they are this up-and-coming team in the standings. But what they achieved last year and what they added to their roster, it signals the fact that they are undoubtedly legit. Undoubtedly. And you saw the 2 games too. We both saw both of those games against the Celtics. They don't have players in which fold. They don't have players in which fold. They don't have players in which are inefficient offensively. They have an efficient offensive system, and they have defenders to defend. Like I said, their wing depth, a little bit concerning to me, but they have the pieces in which can make up for that. And that is why I believe the Cleveland Cavaliers, they have the star power, they have the defensive prowess, especially within their 2 bigs up front in Allen and Mobley. Once you have those 2 things, that's the sign of a good team right there. And JB Bickerstaff too, tremendous leader as a head coach. Once you have all those components, a leader as a head coach, good defense, defensive bigs that, you can funnel. We talked about this with Robert Williams. You can funnel things to them, to the rim defensively from the perimeter. Once you have that, and of course star power, and Darius Garland now, who's developed into an all-star, and Donovan Mitchell, who's been an all-star. Once you have those components in place, the coach, the defense, and the star power, you have the makings of a really, really good basketball team who can potentially win the NBA Finals. And I believe in the year 2023, we could undoubtedly see the Cleveland Cavaliers win the NBA championship. And that is no crazy statement at all.
No, I totally agree. I mean, look, as a Celtics fan as well, I'm really excited, and you mentioned this last week too. I'm really excited to see the Cavs and Celtics duke it out again. I mean, we finally saw a Cavs-Celtics game on national TV since the 2018 Eastern Conference Finals. we
Game
haven't
7, I believe,
seen.
is the last one.
Yep, we haven't seen the Celtics and Cavaliers square away on national TV against each other, and the Celtics have dominated the Cleveland Cavaliers in these recent years since 2018. But this is like I don't want to say a rivalry, but at the same time, a highly anticipated matchup between the Celtics and Warriors await us, and this could definitely be a team where they could have a little advantage over the Celtics, and I don't want to say like they destroy the Celtics. But when we look at, you mentioned that their centers, they're double big with Mobley and Allen. What do those guys have for them other than their athleticism, their youth, right? They do lack a little bit of experience, but their youth compared to Al Horford, who's going to be 37, Blake Griffin, who's going to be older. Obviously, Noah Vonleh, not as experienced. Robert Williams, will his injury still be affecting him in the playoffs? That's still a long way away. There's still a lot of questions to be asked for both the Cavaliers and the Celtics. But right now, something that's a little alarming for the other teams in the Eastern Conference as well, who don't have good center depth, is that the Cavaliers have great center depth. They have their youth, and even Kevin Love coming off the bench, a center who has experience, finals experience, and he can stretch the floor if he can consistently produce the way he's been producing. These Cleveland Cavaliers are undoubtedly a championship contending team, not a playoff contending team. I hope everybody at home is listening to my words carefully, because what I'm saying, and I'm sure even what Seamus is saying, no, we mean it. These Cleveland Cavaliers, they're legit, and I don't think they're going anywhere but up from here.
Yeah, no, you mentioned Kevin Love too. I want to give a big shout out to Kevin Love, who's apparently become, well, not apparently, he has become a legitimate piece within a winning situation. I'm the fact that it's almost 2023 and Kevin Love is still a Cleveland Cavalier, and yet now he is part of a good team again.
And he's
That
still
is just
making bank
astonishing.
too.
Astonishing because they gave him a contract in 2018, I believe. It was a 4-year extension at the time when LeBron left, and it was kind of the signal that, LeBron is gone, but we're going to buy into Kevin Love now. He's our only all-star here because Kyrie was, of course, gone at that moment as well. We're going to buy into Kevin Love. And immediately that was a complete disaster because the team was trying to be bad. They were trying to tank, and Kevin Love, who was still sort of in his prime as an NBA player, but he wasn't quite a number one superstar, he was stuck in that situation of just losing. And we saw in 2019-20 rather, that situation deteriorated all the way until he essentially was having on-court meltdowns.
Yeah.
Right? And Kevin Love, and that's certainly a part of his history in which he's not proud of. But the fact that he's been able to reconcile that, and this team has been able to not only keep him on the roster, but now use him on the roster in today's day and age, in today's NBA, it's just it's an incredible storyline that I believe is still being written. But once we look back on it, it'll just be even crazier knowing that he contributed long, long ago in Minnesota as this tier 1 superstar almost. Then he became this third banana on this championship team for the Cavs, who now we look at this Cavs team, this 2016 Cavs team in history as a legendary team. He was on that team. And now potentially with this year's Cavs, who are just this new generation of Cavaliers, he has a legitimate role on this team, and he's not the third banana. He's the role player. And the fact he's had this, I don't want to say deterioration, but the journey in which he's taken throughout his NBA career to this point, it's one of the craziest journeys anyone has taken, although he's pretty much stayed in only two spots his entire career. He's only been in 2 spots, but it's been one of the craziest journeys in terms of which teams he's been on at both spots. It's been quite the ride for Kevin Love, and I do wish him success because he has saved that situation for himself in Cleveland rather than, hey, maybe getting traded elsewhere, being bought out, and then maybe going to a team. Maybe he's like Blake Griffin where he's just hopping around teams. Now he seems to have a definitive home in Cleveland and somewhere he's contributing. So congratulations to Kevin Love and the Cavs for sticking that situation out for almost 3 years. 3 years.
And it's all paying off, just like you said. Look, we're coming up on our time, Seamus. This was one hell of an episode. I feel like we covered a lot. It's funny how we touched on the Celtics, the Cavs, and the Warriors in the same episode, because just in recent years, finals, those are kind of the 3 teams who have been there. But look, Join back here next week on Sunday, a week from now, 10 a.m. Eastern time to 11 a.m. Eastern time, where we'll recap another week's worth of NBA action and news. If you haven't already, go follow us on Instagram at the Lowe Zone. We cover the entirety of the NBA daily with score updates, breaking news, highlights, all that and more over on the Celtics, over on the Lowe Zone. We also have a podcast, Celtics Talk Weekly, and we do post-game shows for the Celtics as well. Follow Good Time Content on Instagram because they literally have good content all the time. Just about anything, sports, lifestyle, entertainment, anything. You name it, they have it. Subscribe to the YouTube channel here and like this stream. It helps us out a lot. But until next week, that's Seamus Zarlingo. I'm Justin Lowe. Any last words, Seamus, before we head into another week of NBA basketball?
I don't believe I have any words right now other than the fact what's happening with the Lakers. Cool.
Russell Westbrook. Cool. Russell Westbrook off the bench is the answer. He is the answer.
But they gave up 130 points to the Jazz the other night. It's like, how much? I don't want to go to the Lakers.
26 points to Russ. If they didn't have Russ, they would have lost by 50. So, can we look at...
I guess that's true. That's true. There's some positives. Russ, there's some trade value being built there, but those are my final words. Whatever's happening with the Lakers, just highly enjoyable by myself right now. It's been like 3 years now. 2021, they were a mess. Last year, they were a mess. Third year, Lakers a mess. Bring it on, baby. Bring it on.
They keep on running it back, but not in a good way. So that's the more they lose, the more they want to run it back, and it just doesn't make sense. But I think we're going to end it there because we could probably talk about the Lakers for another hour and they're disastrous. We'll save that for next week because who knows, they could have another disastrous week. They probably will. But until next week, I'm Justin Lowe, that's Seamus Zarlingo, and we will see you guys this time.